Hello, everyone, and welcome to another installment Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly and very excited about today's guest. Calida Rawles is a hyper-realist figurative painter whose work explores identity, race, and social politics. Rawles is best known for her ethereal paintings of black bodies floating in a submarine landscape of bubbles, ripples, and refracted light. For Rawls, water signifies both physical and spiritual healing, as well as historical trauma and racial exclusion. She uses this complicated duality as a means to envision a new space for Black healing and to reimagine her subjects beyond racialized tropes. Embedded in her titles and topographical notations of her compositions, Rawls' canvases represent an expansive vision of strength and tranquility during today's turbulent times. She's also one of 12 artists in the exhibition A Superlative Palette, Contemporary Black Women Artists, which is on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center until August 25th. Please join me in welcoming Calida Rawles to today's conversation.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great. So, listen, this is exciting for me for a number of reasons. It's obviously, I love your work, but also this is the first time we're having a conversation. And so, for those people joining us, this is all real and authentic, not pre-rehearsed. So I read your bio, which obviously most people can find online somewhere. But maybe you could just take a couple of minutes or a minute and sort of how do you introduce yourself at parties?
Yeah, just hi, I'm Kalita at parties, you know.
Yeah, but tell us a little bit, maybe a little bit more about you that maybe wasn't covered in your bio. I certainly have a bunch of questions I'd love to ask you, but since we have you here, maybe you can just tell a little bit.
Um, um, I guess let me think. Born and raised in Wilmington, Delaware, um, Biden country, I guess you could say. Um, I always loved painting. It's been the way I express myself most freely, probably.
Hmm.
I love to read. I have four children. Um, I live in LA and paint as much as I possibly can and spend time with my family, all the other moments after.
Thank you for sharing that. So, for those who are joining us, I imagine most have seen some of your paintings either in person or perhaps online. But let's talk a little bit about your work. Your work merges hyperrealism with poetic abstraction, and I want to talk a little bit about how you navigate between these two seemingly contrasting approaches to creativity. Like hyperrealism and abstraction.
I'd say, how do I approach it? It would be, well, one thing, what makes hyperrealism interesting to me is finding abstraction in real life. So maybe that's why
Hmm.
water, using water as a part of my visual language interests me most, or that's what I keep getting excited about. I get excited looking at objects or people or subjects in water, and when there's motion that happens, it looks like abstraction, and I want to capture that. So I think that's why I'm described as both, because I use photographs as references. I play with it, I push photographs, but these are my photographs that I take, um, and often in water. You know?
And obviously, there's a long history of artists using water as a subject matter in their work. I mean, probably since the beginning of painting, because water has always been a critical part of the human experience since the very beginning. In fact, as we are gestating in in the womb, we are around water. So it is a critical part of who we are, both on an elemental level and and on just a purely spiritual level as well. Can you talk about your relationship with water? I mean, my relationship with water has changed so much over the course of my life, and maybe we'll talk about that later. But this is my question to you. Um, can you talk about your historic like your life, but can you talk about your historical relationship with water as a person throughout the time in your life?
Yeah. I think as a child, it was something like I'd go to the beach sometimes with my dad or my family, and that was just like really great, um, joyous moments. Um, and then, I went to public pools to swim, but I didn't have any formal swim classes. And it wasn't until I arrogantly like took this master's swim course and was like, yeah, I can swim because I swam at the public pool sometimes with my friends where you were standing in the water most of it, like I don't even know what I was thinking. And I joined and I realized I really couldn't swim. I didn't know strokes. I hardly could get across the whole, lap of the pool. And this wonderful coach, Bonnie, took me to the side and said, "Girl, take this kickboard and just kick back and forth because you're scaring me." And but over time, I kept going back, and she was patient and taught me how to properly swim, how to really float, and I really got into it. And then it was, so I guess you could say it first started as like an exercise as an adult, and then when I was in the water, I would look around under the water, above the water, and it just looks so beautiful. And and then at the same time, anything that was like stressful or I was really upset about, I didn't feel that weight when I left the pool. And I started thinking, wow, I could put this as a part of my practice. I could, in a way, think of or address heavy issues and make it seem lighter with water. Just because one, it's just beautiful to look at. You view it and you can get lost. But I also thought of that idea of me having any stress in my life, but it kind of went away once I was in the water. And I thought if I could use that idea of talking about heavy, difficult issues with water, but it won't feel so heavy handed and it could probably be received in a lighter way. And so then it became a part of my practice. And I started painting using water, thinking of it. And then I started like researching it. Then I started thinking of my relationship with the water. And I thought of Black people's experiences with water, the history we have with it from, you know, um, if we start of our relationship of coming to the United States with Middle Passage or segregation laws, keeping water out of our daily lives of leisure, in pools, in oceans, and even going back to and then the history of us being swimmers and surfers not really being talked about too. So all of those kind of things came into play. And when you put the Black body in water, that history is connected to it. I thought it was very interesting.
Thank you for sharing that. I have this like feeling, and maybe not in our lifetime, but perhaps. I mean, it seems to be coming more quickly than I thought. That water is becoming more and more of a luxury. It's obviously it's a necessity, but in a way, like access to clean water, access to water even for recreation is becoming viewed as more of like a luxurious thing. And clean water, obviously, that's a whole nother conversation that has a lot to do with corporations and all those kinds of things. But I'm curious, I'm curious about, like, for example, you mentioned having four kids. We have that in common. I also have four kids, so there's that. But what about your children in water? I mean, are they swimmers now? I mean, this is just like a personal like question that I'm curious about, because you had your journey in your relationship. So did you force your kids to learn how to swim?
100%. That was a lot of our playtime when they were little. It's constantly playing in the water. They were very comfortable very early. So we were always in the pool. I mean, I wanted to tire them out so they could take naps. So when they were young, so it was like the pool was perfect for that. Um,
Right,
but yeah, and I live in California now, so going to the beach
right.
as much as possible is important. And yeah, the pool itself was a part of our activities.
Yeah, it's interesting because I grew up with almost I could say almost no relationship with swimming as a pastime. There were local. I grew up in Brooklyn and Bed-Stuy. There were obviously community pools that you could go to, but they were crazy. So you didn't really want to go to those. And then
Hmm.
maybe once or twice in the summer, family might go to like Coney Island or some other beach. But even those experiences were not really rooted in the idea of swimming. It was more like all of the other, the amusement park and the arcade and all of that. So my relationship with water really just changed drastically when I became an adult and was able to travel on my own, and then had to sort of like engage with water in a very, very like one-on-one way, learning to swim better, which I could probably still learn to swim a bit better. But let's switch it up a little bit, because I'm sure you talk about water a lot. What were you painting before you were painting water?
I did a lot of portraits. I think I love painting people. The figure has always been something I've been interested in capturing. Um, but now I don't necessarily consider myself a portrait artist, but I do, yeah, paint. I'm a figurative work artist.
And so obviously water is such a big part of what people identify you with in terms of your work, but there are figures, there are people, there are human beings in your
Mm.
work. Let's talk about the people in your work. How do you identify who you want to include in a painting? Are these family members? Are these friends? Are these strangers on the street? People you saw swimming? Can you talk a little bit about that relationship you have with the human beings that are in your paintings?
Yeah, I think most of my subjects are people I have intimate relationships with, from friends to family, um, and I have a certain connection with. But at the same time, I don't think I'm painting portraits of them. I think they're symbols of
Hmm.
other meanings, but I do use them.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's interesting because water does even distort one's features, right? And so, in a way, once you're painting someone who's submerged, you kind of have to adjust for the refraction and the changing. So it becomes more, as we mentioned earlier, a little bit more abstract, a little less direct in
Hmm.
many ways as well. And I'm sure over time you've kind of like adjusted your way, to approaching that. There's a reference to like healing and trauma in your work, whether direct or indirect, and I'd love to hear a little bit about that from you, sort of, and as much as you're willing to share. I mean, we all have
Hmm.
things that we are still unpacking throughout our lives, even as
Hmm.
adults. But can you talk about those two themes of healing and trauma as it relates to your work?
Yes. I think water itself is something that's like scary, deadly, but also healing, right? So I think in my work, I'm trying to express joy and relaxation, but a lot of it does have trauma in it. So I think there's that balance of life and thinking of life in that philosophy in like a philosophical way. Um, but like I was thinking of a work of mine, let's say, like there's a painting yesterday called and said we were together. That piece has two figures like up in the corner. They're small, but when I painted that, I was thinking a lot about a closeness you could have with someone, but you've lost them, or you can't reach them, and it's just like a memory. I painted that piece thinking of the loss of my cousin that I was very close to. Close cousins, you feel like, like somebody in your family, when you're looking at them, you know what they're thinking, or you can laugh, or you don't have to say much, like we were that close. And when she passed, I was painting the series A Dream for My Lilith that in like 2020. Um, and so a lot of the work connected to that for me and healing. And so healing from that. And so when I painted it, the figures looked like synchronized in their motion. They made me think of like birds in the sky, and it's just like this soft, like there's no water there. It looks like a mist or something. This space that lost space and time. And but then there's other works that deal with police brutality or recognizing locations that Black people have been victimized. and so I'll place that in the body or the water, and they're all in that. Not all of them have it, but sometimes I do use small Easter eggs, you could say, that takes the art to another level, like, but I'm okay a lot of times with people not seeing that directly, because sometimes people will ask me, like, how would you know unless, I talk to you? But to me, it's kind of like, if you look at my painting and you just see something beautiful and it moves you, that's good enough. And it's kind of like meeting a person or knowing someone. You have a relationship with them, and if you want to spend more time, you'll get to know a deeper level of it, and the work has that to it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating that anyone, and I've heard this not necessarily about your work, but about other artists' work, where a viewer or collector or what have you wants everything to just be spelled out for them. It's just they just want to look at a painting and like understand every single thing that the artist was thinking when they made it, which to me is like hilarious because like A, how could you? And B, why would you even want to? You kind of like need to live with something. If a painting tells you everything you need to know in like 5 minutes, then like what else can you get from it, right? It needs to
Right.
unfold. It needs to unfold.
Mm-hmm.
I've had paintings that I've looked at for years and then I haven't looked at it in a while and I come back and I see something I didn't even see, all that time. Like I was looking at all
Mm-hmm.
that time. So I think that's like the beauty of living with art and everything just not being so in your face and spelled out. And so there's some other sort of influences that you've had. Like for example, you mentioned the story of Lilith, a figure associated with like rebellion and demonization. What drew you to that myth? Like, and how do you reinterpret it in your paintings?
Um, so I heard about the story of it, or, I thought it was really fascinating because I grew up thinking of Adam and Eve. I didn't know of this alternate story of creation where Adam had a first wife, Lilith. And when I learned about that, I just wanted to read more about it. And then learning that she was demonized for wanting to be equal with Adam, and therefore she left Eden. She left because, went to the sea, um, and then almost punished for that. I was fascinated with it. And I remember calling my cousin that I lost, my cousin Shauna, and I was just like, just, we talked about it and we started laughing and thinking like maybe we're descendants of Lilith and not Eve, because we're these rebellious women. And so it became kind of like a way we greet each other on the phone, like, hey, Lilith, what's up? And we started doing that. And when she passed, thinking of the show and saying, this show was dedicated to her, but the name of it is A Dream for My Lilith. So it was to her, but also to all the women out there that, may be seen as difficult because they want
Mm,
equal rights or
mm,
demanding or too much or, all of that for not wanting to lay beneath the man. And I thought that was
mm.
kind of cool. And so the show took that on, and I used one of my daughters and her best friends as the models, most of the images um, from them. So these friends that were very close, which was kind of symbolic of me, of my cousin at a younger age, and created the show in that way.
I love that. And I also love how artists can, find these influences, either they're historical or they're mythological or they're religious or whatever these influences are, and then sort of imbue that into their work. And then later on, as we were discussing just a few minutes ago, you discover this in the work. Like it's
Mhm.
like a story you may not have even known, and you're learning it through a painting or body of work that an artist has created, which I think is also like one of the wonderful, like brilliant aspects of being an art lover, and in my case a curator. I think I have one of the best jobs in the world, just because I enjoy doing it, but also it exposes me to so many ideas, like all the time. Like I can't be bored. It's impossible to be bored because someone's always telling me something either I didn't know or I can think about in a different way. So I really enjoy that. So let's talk about like the women and the girls in your painting. I mean, they're you often reflect on women and girls in your paintings, and they're in these like meditative states. Can you talk about like your view on like Black femininity as it through the lens of your work, if that question makes any sense?
Black femininity. Yeah, I mean,
Like for example,
actually, yeah, clarify.
um, yeah, yeah. If there's like, for example, if is there you mentioned like Lilith being sort of rebellious and somewhat symbolic of women who are just going to do what they think is the best thing to do with their own lives, right? And then thinking about your paintings, is there anything you're trying to say as it relates to independence, as it relates to self-determination for women? And again, maybe not, but I'm just kind of curious to see, is that something that you're thinking about when you're in your studio or when you're painting?
Definitely. I mean, that's what the show was about. So I was definitely thinking about it and um, wanting to convey that they looked, as you said, like serene and um, they looked like they had agency over an element that's larger than them, and I think that's what I'm always trying to convey. Like, life is hard and you have to breathe through it and take the ways as they come. And they had, even though they're in this body of water where you can't see the beginning and end, they look in control. And I think
Mm.
show, when you see something, it can open up your mind to believe that you have that, that power. It opens up doors of possibilities and hope. And I hope that the work gives that to others because it does it for me. The work itself is therapeutic, and I'm hoping
Right,
other
right.
people can take it in. Yeah.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And how do you like balance or navigate between like creating art that's so like deeply personal and then work that can connect to like broader societal issues? Does that even matter to you? Is the work just about you getting your ideas into the world, or is there any sort of is it important to you that people understand what your work is about? Is that very important to you?
Well, I think what I paint and what people get from it are both equally as important. I mean, what I intend for people to get and their interpretation is has the same value. Um, I uh, I want them. I love creating images that aren't so readily seen. Like seeing, I know we've shared that there, people have been painting people in water since paintings were happening, right? But I think because of our relationship with water, especially in the United States, the stereotypes of us being able to swim, seeing us with agency and freedom and with our body, um, I think it's empowering. And I wanted to not only show that, but um, I don't know, address a lot of other issues in a unique way. You know,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I get that. I get that. In a few minutes, we're going to look at some of your paintings and kind of talk through some of the work.
okay,
But I'm also curious about other influences. Like for example, we obviously we know that water has been a big influence. We talked about the story of Lilith and how that sort of influenced you. But what are some of the other things that influence you? I know like people will often ask artists, who are the other artists that you like? I'm not really asking you that per se. I'm just curious about what are some of the other things that you draw influences from in your life that kind of finds its way into your work. If there anything that you can talk about.
I think I could probably talk about literature more than work art.
Sure, sure,
I love
please.
to read, and I love to read. I listen to books while I paint more than music. I
Hmm.
read when I'm at home. Uh, I love novels and stories of Black rebellion, or history, or womanism, and theoretical uh, issues that relate to my life and my culture. Um, I think all of that influences me, along with the political climate. I think that takes a play. Like something's going on, I could, you know, I think about it, ruminates in my head, think about how do I want to express it? Can I? What way I would, you know? And then, especially if something's like bubbling, like I'm upset about, like uh, did a certain Oblivion, that show in New York, in November. I had a total different direction I wanted to take in that show. And then when Roe was overturned, I needed to paint about that. I was so upset and angry. Um, that was a way to get it out for me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, for me, whenever I get to a point where I just need a creative boost, or I'm trying to like figure something out, or just like whether it's something I need to write or idea for a show, I just watch a couple of really fantastic movies, and probably movies I've already seen, because then I know they're fantastic. I'm not like rolling the dice. And whether it's through a scene, some scenery, or dialogue, I usually find a breakthrough through someone else's sort of like masterful creativity. There's like,
Hmm.
because because great art, whether it's paintings or cinema or literature, it's supposed to inspire you. So for me, if I'm at a block, if I'm like struggling with something as it relates to like the visual art world, I'll just move over to cinema, and there's usually an answer, because most problems are not new and they've been solved by somebody else, and you just got to like find the answer. Maybe it's through someone
Hmm.
else's creativity, and you're like, yeah, that's exactly how I should be approaching that, right? So it's interesting that you talk about listening to audiobooks, because that's a
Hmm.
huge pastime of mine. And I mean, that maybe that's my age speaking, but I could totally, I can totally relate to how listening to audiobooks versus music when you're in the studio can have a different impact on
Hmm.
your creative output as well.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna send a like a little like verbal cue to the producers behind the scenes that we want to cue up some of the images. But in the meantime, while they're doing that, can maybe you can talk to me a little bit about like how some people responded. Oh, they did that fast. Look at that. It's already up there on the screen. So we will talk about this work, of course. But I'm curious. I mean, you've been an artist for quite a while. I mean, how people respond to you in person? Like, what? Tell me one or maybe one story. I'm sure you got at least one funny story, or maybe it's not funny at all. But interacting with someone at a show, an opening, and how your work has impacted them. I'm just curious.
I get different reactions. Like
Mm.
sometimes it's from grief. Like when I was
Mm.
at my show at the Perez Museum, that's up right now at the Perez, in Miami. And someone came up after a talk I had, and they were like, "I just lost a friend to drowning, and
Mm.
I came here and I feel so much better. Looking at your work, I didn't know how I was going to react, but I feel better being here and seeing your images." And then I have people that say, "I went and scuba dived because of you," or "I'm
Mm.
taking swim lessons," or "It just feels good." But I do get messages from people with trauma with water. And that's what's so great about this body of work, or me working in this way, is that everyone comes with their own relationship with water. It's not just, this one thing of this Black experience with water. I think everyone has a personal relationship with it, from fear to memories of childhood, or, you know, with it being leisurely or not, something that's happened. And then they look at the work and it takes their brain to all those places. And, they have to wrestle with that and take that in. And, like that is very interesting to me, and I'm happy I'm there. And so far it's been great, reviews about it. They felt good, even if they have very difficult, even if they have a difficult relationship with it. I think it's been healing for a lot of people, and I'm glad to do that because it's been healing for me.
That's great. That's great. Um, so we have a few of your paintings that we can discuss. So this work,
Mhm.
Requiem for My Navigator, is also included in the current exhibition at the Harvey B. Gantt Center. Was so excited to get this work into the show. When I saw it, I was like, "That's the one." Um, I won't even tell people about how like the logistics, but it's a large painting, and if I'm not mistaken, it had to come from the West Coast. But anyway, it's in the show. Please share some background on this painting.
So this painting was from my show in New York, On the Other Side of Everything. This body of work I did. Um, the subject is my husband, but the show itself was me thinking of the black male experience, which I obviously cannot speak upon because I'm not a black male. However, I kept thinking about how um, what is it like to think that you know someone or feel like you understand their experience. And using my husband, who a man I'm like very close to, obviously, um, I thought of like how we can witness or be a witness to someone's life, be very close to them, but in all relationships, no matter how close you are, you never really know anyone because we're all evolving and changing and moving. You only can see a piece and part of anyone. And in that show, he was the only one you could see his face. Everyone else was kind of their face was above the water, and it was like this near abstraction. But I feel like I did know. Obviously, I know him, I see him, but just a side of him, and it's a beautiful side. He's a wonderful man, but it was like this idea of how complicated it is to have any relationship, and even what is intimacy. Now, when I painted that, it was I just loved how the water. One, I just love the composition because his nose is right up. It's like I was breaking rules that I've learned in art school. Like his nose is right to the edge, but yet I feel like it doesn't feel like he's enclosed in. There's only a piece of him, but there's so much more above. There's so much abstraction. He's at the bottom of the canvas, so he holds weight, but the top also holds weight. It was just a really fun painting to do, and you know, it's a handsome man. He was fun to paint. I know his face. It was, but it was. I enjoy that and think about the light that's outside of the water. Like you could see outside the water too, and see him. And there's just so much more. It's definitely one of those paintings you can look at for a long time and see more things, and it's layered. And I don't know. I think
Well,
all of
thank
them
you
are
for
my
sharing.
favorites, but I was about to say it's my favorite, but I'm going to say that probably with all of them because they're all my babies.
Well, well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, for me, as you might remember, I said when I saw this painting, I was like, "That's the one," um, and I'll tell you why this painting resonated with me. So, and it kind of touches on what you just said about breaking the rules a bit. I really was struck by your willingness to place the figure so close to the edge, which sort of, to me is an indication of, there's more going on in the scene than meets
Hmm.
the eye, right? So
Hmm.
so it doesn't feel like you're seeing the entire scene. It feels like you're just seeing a piece of something much grander, which to me adds a certain level of mystery.
Hmm.
The weight of the water above the figure also was fascinating to me because it's a bit of a disorienting painting as well because you're not
Hmm.
actually sure of where you are. I mean, are you Are you level with the figure? Are you beneath them looking up? There's just a lot of different elements to this, and then the interplay of the, which you find in many of your works, of the blue and the darker colors, or blue and black, I also found to be quite interesting as well. And also, finally, before we move on to the next, the fact that the subject in the painting has their eyes closed, right, which to me was also quite interesting, because there was almost a sense of, I mean, it almost felt a bit like baptism in some ways as well. So there
Mm-hmm.
was a lot of different things I was trying to understand, and put myself in your shoes in making this work. So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, thank you for creating it. Let's move on. Let's move to the next painting.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
Lovely, lovely work. So same thing. Please tell us what you can.
This piece um, is a piece I did of my nephew. I was trying to capture this joy, like black joy, black love, and when my nephew came to visit me, it was right after I used him as a subject for a painting of mine, in the light for Trayvon, no, in the light for Stefan Clark. And so it was like this, thinking about that loss. I didn't want to just use him as a subject in something that was so dark. I also used him something with joy. And so when I painted him here, it was like there's like this energy coming from him, and I wanted to capture that. Hence this odd, weird hand that's like mysteriously like there. Um, but it was it was really fun to paint. It was like, I don't know, I love what happens to the body. These areas that like when the skin is broken, and it's like these, I don't know, like the way the texture of the skin looks in the water. When I look closely, it almost looks like terrain or land.
Mm.
And I love that. I love what happens there. That's somewhere abstraction. And this is an older work here. Um, but it was just something that I think the water looks mysterious and odd and colorful, and I don't know. It was just a fun piece. When I was painting it, I really enjoyed it, and seeing that smile, that beautiful man, young boy.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, the hand, which I think for some people when they see this work, maybe the hand is the second thing they see. Obviously, you
Hmm.
have this beautiful face and body, and then you sort of notice the hand later. Actually, the hand is like almost the first thing that I noticed in this work, because it's
Hmm.
disembodied, and it's sort of like, again, with the breaking the rules a little bit, in the sense of like,
Hmm.
you know where's this hand coming from? But there's a certain gentleness to the
Hmm.
hand. And
Hmm.
again, we project our own ideas and thoughts onto the things that we see. So obviously I can only use my own imagination, but to me that hand just seems like a gentle, like guiding hand, almost
Hmm.
a protecting hand. And
Hmm.
it, and of course it could just be someone else that's in the water, right? Whose hand just
Hmm.
happens to be in that position. But for
Hmm.
me, the choice you made as the artist to include this, sort of disembodied hand in this work, says to me that that hand is important.
Hmm.
And so I spend a lot of time when I look at this painting, like, thinking about that hand, what it represents, who it is. And again, without the luxury, I would have to say, of talking to the artist, let me just say something about that for a moment. It is, for me, it is such a luxury to be able to talk to artists about the work that they've made, as opposed to just reading about it.
Hmm.
And I often forget that most people who are art lovers don't get the opportunity to actually ask a question directly to the artist who made the work.
Hmm.
And so I'm reminded of that when we do these open air talks, like holy, like wow, it's amazing. I get to do this, right? So anyway, I hope my audio is still coming through loud and clear. Give me a thumbs up if it is, because I think like one of my earbuds just died, so I'm hoping you can hear me perfectly
I
fine.
can hear you.
Let's Great. Let's move on to the next image. Uh, Fabulous work. Let's talk about it.
Guardian. I painted that in my show, A Dream for My Lilith too. That was this woman. I think she's holding her belly, which I felt like this life inside. I thought of the ancestors, this totem pole, this reflection that moves up. I was thinking of the skin and how it made me, in reflection, look like branches in a tree.
Hmm.
Um, there's a softness that happens in this piece, and this space, and feels ghostly almost. And I thought a lot of that when I was painting it. The composition and the shape of the canvas, I was thinking of it as a doorway opening up for me to look back and think of the ancestors and my connection to them.
What's Thank you for that. What's interesting to me also is when an artist decides to make a painting vertical versus horizontal, like what that does.
Hmm.
Not to get too much into the weeds on things that people probably don't think about, or I hope they care about, or perhaps they don't think about, is the decision to go vertical or horizontal or square, and how that impacts your relationship as the viewer to the painting.
Hmm.
Because this painting is vertical and you have that sort of inverted reflection of the subject, again, it affects how your brain is processing what you're looking at, because
Hmm.
you have to find your location. At least from my perspective, you have to find your location in paintings often to figure out like where you're, like where you are
Hmm.
in relation to what you're looking at.
Hmm.
And so I think that was a really brilliant choice in this work. Now you may have mentioned this, and I hope I didn't miss it. But did you mention whether or not the woman in this painting, is she pregnant? Is did you mention that?
The model was pregnant, and yes, I
Right.
felt like her hands were cupping the belly. So it was like thinking of the life inside of her, and then I thought of the generational life, and like I said, the arm when it reflects above the water, her head cuts off, like the shoulder cuts off right almost not in the center, but a little bit above center, and then the rest is like a reflection of that body.
Mm-hmm.
If
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
capturing it in a way, and then I kind of pushed it up, and it became another form. And it could be more than that. It could be mist or whatever. But I was thinking of that reflection and what that is, a reflection of our lineage.
Thank you. Let's go to the next
Mhm.
image. I have a couple of technical questions I want to ask you, but we'll change to the next image. This is a good one for my technical question. Okay, great. So before you tell us a little bit about this work, one of my questions is, how are you making these decisions about color, right? Because water is an interesting thing. We've all Anyone who has been around kids long enough will probably have get the question like, why does water look blue in the ocean, right? And then you're like, what did I learn in school about that? Like, how could I
Mhm.
not be an idiot when I answer this question?
Mhm.
But water can take on so many colors even without any contamination. Obviously, if you put something
Mhm.
in water, that's obvious. But water in and of itself can look so different depending upon different factors. For you, how are you making decisions about color? This is a much sort of whiter, paler painting. Like, why? That would be my first question.
Well, this is the painting I was talking about, of thinking of my cousin and getting rid of thinking of a loss. They're synchronized. They look like they're in a space of lacking of location. So I took the water out in my head. It was like there is no space or time. This is this them in motion together. I used closer to the figure reflections as if they're in the water, but it could be a mist, it could be whatever you want it to be. So I to me it's otherworldly. They are in another dimension almost for me. And so the color, it's still like the palest blue, but I kind of think of it as like a white painting. And
Mm.
and just even the composition of self, of making them very small and like synchronized, and like when I blur my eyes I think of birds flying. I think of them moving together without having to look at each other per se, but moving in motion because they are connected. It's a moment where sometimes when you're talking to someone on the phone and you lose, like, were we talking for 3 hours? Like, you lose space, you lose time, you're just so connected, you go somewhere else. And
Mm.
that's what I was thinking of. And so the color in this painting, is a reflection of that.
Yeah, I love that synchronicity, and I can feel it. And certainly, if one were to take a quick glance at this work without like studying it, you might even for a moment, just for a moment, think because of the aerial view, you might be think you're looking at birds. So I totally get that sort of like feeling when we're just coming off of the Olympics, and I've been mesmerized by synchronized swimming because that's incredible. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it, but
Yes,
that's
it is
like
incredible.
you might think you can swim. Look at that. That's going to change your
Hmm.
mind about about what you think you can do in the water. So yeah. So let's go to the next image, and maybe I'm losing track, but let's go to the next image. I think we have a couple more. So again, this speaks a lot to my question about color and your choices of color and how you can go bright and go dark, and such a contrast
Hmm.
between this work and the work that we just saw. So please tell us a little bit about this work.
So this was a part of a certain oblivion when I was thinking of women's rights. I made all of the, well, most of the work in that show was very dark because I was thinking we were in a dark time. When I painted this piece, I was thinking of where is the beginning of one's life? Where's the beginning of that? And I had this image of a friend, and if I just describe, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. It's so dark, but imagine when I shot the image, I'm above her and she's holding herself like this, but it's so dark and it's from above. You kind of can't make it out, but it looks like to me like a celestial body or
Mm,
like stars or something other, like in space almost. And I was thinking if life can begin with, or everything begins with self love and taking care of yourself. And that's a little different than you know another way of thinking of where life begins. But in this dark space, everything begins in darkness. And as I was trying to almost mentally accept that Roe was overturned in my anger, I was thinking, oh, this is the beginning. And just because I'm in a dark space and dark time, that's where a reset happens. That's where a new beginning can happen. And so I tried to flip it in my head as, oh, this is a restart. We're going to, you know, when if you think of like in the Bible, let there be light, or that's the beginning of it, but there had to be darkness first. And
mm.
when the creation of anything was made, it probably started in the darkness. So I thought of that. Those were all my thoughts behind that, and just how the water in that piece, in when you look at dark night water, the water itself, it's like it looks like stars. It looks like
Mm.
you're in another space, and I enjoyed that, and I wanted to capture it. It was really fun and hard. It was one of the challenging to paint. I realized why I don't see more black and dark paintings. It's very hard to paint. I had to black paint, especially wet, is so reflective. I had to cut all the lights off in my studio so I could see it because it was so reflective. If I put a spotlight, I couldn't see it because of the light. So I had to cut all of the lights off and paint that series of work in the dark. And so it was almost like not guessing where to go, but I had to really, I mean, I had to up my prescription on my glasses because I messed up my eyes, just like painting in the dark. But that's the only way I could really see my brushstrokes. And that was like a fun exercise in itself, you know? And I was like, oh, that's why this is challenging. But it was fun. It was fun. I like to challenge myself. I like to push myself. I love that we're showing this work because it looks very different. A lot of people may not see it and not know of my work in this way, but I really love to play. You know, I want to show all different forms and sides of myself and my practice.
Well, interesting that you mentioned your eyes because we had a question that came in that said basically, given the level of detail and your realism in your painting, is it strenuous on your eyes? I guess you just said it can be.
Yes, it can be. Yes, it can be. I need to do this. I say I'm going to, but I don't. I'm supposed to put drops in my eyes because sometimes I paint for so long. I went to the doctor because I was like, sometimes I'll paint and things just go blurry. My vision just goes blurry. And went to the doctor to see what was happening. And they were like, because I think sometimes I get into a trance of painting. I'm painting for so many hours. I'm not blinking enough. So my eyes get
Ah,
dry because I don't blink. And
huh.
then they were like, you have to rest your eyes. You got to look around more. And all this. But when I'm painting, I'm not thinking, and I'm listening to my book. I'm all in it, and I'm just, I'm not, moving my eyes enough around, and so my eyes do get tired. I have to get better
Yeah, I
at
mean,
this.
reminding ourselves of these things is very important. I mean, you shared, I'll share. I'm not big on sitting, which is sort of like a weird thing because I'm sitting right now, but I prefer to
Hmm.
stand. And there will be days, and I kid you not, there will be days where I will realize that for no reason I've been standing for 5 hours.
Hmm.
And then I start, and then just working and standing, and then I'll realize like,
Hmm.
why do I feel so strange? And I'm like, yeah, because you haven't sat down. It's 5 o'clock. You haven't sat down since like 11 or a.m. or noon, and
Hmm.
you're just like walking around, and you get into these trances of zones of doing things, and you forget about your body. I guess my point of that story is like sometimes we forget about we have a body,
Hmm.
and that
Hmm.
body needs certain things like food, water, rest,
Yes.
air.
Yes. Hmm.
And for artists, I think it's also important for artists to remind themselves of those things, like taking care of yourself. I mean, obviously, we hear the term self care so much, but
Hmm.
really, it is about like acknowledging the fact that you are doing something that is very, very strenuous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're fortunate, you'll be doing this for decades to come. So, taking care of your eyes now, and this is for every other artist that's listening. Taking
Yes.
care of your eyes now is so important for the future of your practice as an artist. Like, and no, people don't talk about that enough. But they
Hmm.
should. They should. Let's go to the next image, and maybe the producers can tell me how many more images we have left because I've been enjoying talking to you so much. I'm like losing track of where we are in the slideshow. So let's talk about this work. Man, we're down to the final 7 minutes here, Kalita.
Uh-oh. So this was like other guys with ancient rage, me being angry again. I was imagining myself with a cauldron, like I want to spin this around and rethink what's happening here with women's rights. Why, I thought of this body moving around and forming, but the body itself is an adult. So I was thinking, I care about this life, and I get, I guess you can say, I think it's really unfair. Pro life has such a good slogan. Like, I mean, pro life, it's like, that's a good one, because I'm pro life too. I'm pro life. I want people, all of us, to have full lives the way we want to live them. And I thought
Mm,
of this
yeah.
woman
Yeah.
forming, because that's all we're doing. I'm still evolving and changing and becoming something new. So I'm changing too. So I thought of when you look at an embryo and it's changing and growing, but I took a full form woman moving in water, like you were saying, the embryonic fluid, and how it looks like an embryo, but she's moving and there's these stages. I thought of it like a clock too, with time. And so I put her all on the edge in this darkness coming in with the water in the center. And it felt like I could
Yeah.
feel the steam coming off of it.
Great
And
choice.
that's
Great
what it
choice
is.
of the
Mm-hmm.
tondo, the circular painting, and obviously that immediately does evoke time and evoke the clock. So
Mm-hmm.
so we have one more image, one more image. So let's get to that final image. Quite
Mm-hmm.
different, actually. Quite different
Mm-hmm.
than the works we've seen before because the figure is more sort of like in your face, forefront. So curious about the choice, and please share what you can.
Well, this one is in my show at the Perez Museum. Um, just his fingertips are touching the water. The water itself is a natural, it's not in a pool. It was the ocean water in Miami and it's very green. I thought that was very beautiful. And it was, Towner for life. He had that on his chest with much pride for Overtown. The show itself was about, it was me responding to the Overtown community in Miami. And I met my subjects there in Miami, um, got to know them and did, yeah, a photo shoot with maybe like 10 people there. And this was one of the images I got. And I thought he just, it was just, it was a beautiful form, composition, and it just looks magical. And I'm just proud of his pride of his community, and I wanted to capture that. But he's contemplative. He's thinking. He's like a thinker. There's also so many references you can play with. The sacrifice that's happened. It has like the sacrificial shape. Like the cross and being on the wood is kind of there a bit. And Overtown being kind of sacrificed to make Miami's highways there. I was thinking a lot of that when I created the piece.
Yeah, yeah. It's mentioned. It's funny you mentioned the wood, and there is a sort of like almost a crucifix. This is not a word. Almost a crucifixal nature. Maybe it is a word
Mm-hmm,
of the work. I mean,
mm-hmm,
I totally get that and see that, and it's a
mm-hmm,
brilliant painting. So that's the final
mm-hmm.
image. Maybe you can just take a moment to tell us a little bit about the show at the Perez, and then we'll be coming to the end of our discussion today, which went by very, very quickly, which means, you're really good. Um, so tell us about the show at the Perez.
I believe it's up till February. I was really talking with the curator there. They asked me to do something that was slightly site specific. And I thought, I was, something that Miami itself, um, you know, addressed Miami itself. And so then when I started doing a little bit of research in Miami, I thought of Miami. My first thought was like, where are the black people? Where's the black history in Miami? Because that's just that's what I do. So when I came across Overtown and the story of Overtown and thinking what's happening there, gentrification, the mass displacement that happened to the community, that's something that's happened all across the country for black people. It became larger than Miami itself because, again, like I said, every major city you can think of, it put a highway right in the middle of some thriving, beautiful black communities. And I went and talked to people in my Overtown, and I wanted to document it. I document that because when I think of Miami, I'm definitely an outsider. I think of like the Strip. I think of Cuban community, the Haitian community. I had limited knowledge about Black people that came, um, that basically built Miami, who built the railroad system there. You know, the Black people that I guess, yeah, I didn't know of that. And I wanted that
Mm-hmm.
story, that history documented and not lost. And so when people
Mm-hmm.
come to Miami, they learn more about Miami. And
Mm-hmm.
because it was interesting to me, since I was hoping it was interested in others.
Fantastic. Well, Kalida, we are at the end of today's discussion. I want to thank you for your generosity. Thank you for welcoming us into your space and answering my litany of questions. I'm gonna, make my way down to see your show. The good news is that it's on through the end of the year. So with Miami
Mm-hmm.
Basel coming up, there's definitely uh, opportunity to see the show. So I'm excited about that. So here are my final words. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support of viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and further develop programs like Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by texting Give to Gantt to 91999. Also, subscribe to the Gantt's YouTube channel for future programs and other video updates. We want to announce next month's open air conversation. It would be with artist Adrian Nieves. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful evening and take care.